Fine, let's start. Number 1. Homo Naledi burials and engravings. Imagine squeezing your body through a vertical crack in solid rock, a gap that narrows in places to just 18 centimeters. At the bottom of that chute, deep inside the Rising Star Cave system in South Africa's cradle of humankind, lies a chamber that is quietly rewriting what we thought made us human. In 2015, the paleoanthropologist Lee Berger announced a new species from this chamber, Homo Naledi. His team recovered more than 1,550 specimens from at least 15 individuals, one of the richest hominin collections ever unearthed in Africa. The reason it needed such a narrow team was practical. Berger recruited 6 slender excavators, most of them women, who trained in 2013 and 2014 to reach a space no ordinary field crew could enter. What makes Naledi so unsettling is its brain. Its skull held only 465 to 610 cubic centimeters of brain tissue, roughly a third of a modern human brain, which averages about 1,350. For a long time, small brains were treated as a sign of a simple mind. Then came the dates. In 2017, researchers led by Paul Dirks placed these fossils between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago, using optically stimulated luminescence, uranium thorium, and electron spin resonance. That range overlaps with the earliest members of our own species. In 2023, Berger's team went further. In a set of preprints, they claimed Naledi had deliberately buried its dead, carved geometric engravings into the cave walls, and possibly controlled fire. They described oval pits dug into the floor, holding skeletons in flexed positions, and cross-hatched patterns on the dolomite pillars of the hill antechamber. If confirmed, these burials would predate the oldest accepted burials of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals by 100,000 years or more. The claims arrived alongside a Netflix documentary, and the backlash was immediate. Reviewers for the journal eLife, including Maria Martinon Torres, judged the evidence incomplete. Skeptics argued the pits could be natural sediment slumps, and pointed out the engravings had not been directly dated. Berger countered that the skeletons lay articulated and below the surrounding sediment, exactly what deliberate digging would produce. He was joined on the behavioral papers by Agustin Fuentes, a Princeton anthropologist, which lent the interpretation weight across disciplines. And this was not a single freak deposit. In 2017, the team announced a second chamber called Lasidi, which held still more Naledi individuals, showing the bodies had reached these deep spaces more than once. The anatomy only deepens the mystery. Naledi had human-like feet and hands built for walking, yet curved fingers suited to climbing, and that tiny brain. So 3 possibilities sit on the table. The first is intentional burial by a small-brained hominin. The second is natural accumulation misread as ritual. The third is something in between, repeated deliberate placement of bodies without the full ceremony we imagine. Whatever the verdict, Naledi has already broken one assumption, that symbolic behavior requires a large modern brain. And if brain size is not the gatekeeper we assumed, what else in the timeline have we simply misdated? Number 2. Grotte Mandrin. In a rock shelter overlooking the Rhône Valley in southern France, 2 human species appear to have traded the same address. The archaeologist Ludovic Slimak had worked the site of Grotte Mandrin for decades when, in February 2022, his team published a startling result in Science Advances. Homo sapiens, they argued, occupied the shelter around 54,000 years ago. That is roughly 10,000 years earlier than the accepted arrival of modern humans in Western Europe. The evidence lives in a layer called Layer E, packed with a distinctive stone tool tradition known as the Neronian. These are tiny, standardized points, far smaller and more uniform than the typical Mousterian tools made by Neanderthals. Their precision hints at projectile weapons, perhaps a bow or a spear thrower. Within Layer E, the team found a single child's baby tooth, a deciduous molar. When Clément Zanoli examined its internal structure with microcomputed tomography, it read as Homo sapiens. The teeth in the layers directly above and below it were Neanderthal. Read that stratigraphy carefully, and a remarkable picture emerges. Neanderthals lived here, then modern humans, then Neanderthals again. The two populations effectively alternated in the same cave. To measure how fast that switch happened, the team pioneered a method called phylogenochronology, reading the layers of soot deposited on the cave wall by ancient fires. Their analysis suggested the transition between one occupation and the next could have been as short as a single year. The site sits at a natural choke point, a corridor along the Rhone that links the Mediterranean coast to the heart of continental Europe, exactly where you would expect early travelers to pass. The chronology itself rested on three separate clocks: radiocarbon, thermoluminescence, and the soot sequence, cross-checked against one another. That raises the possibility of a genuine, face-to-face encounter, not a slow succession over millennia. This directly challenges the tidy model in which Neanderthals were replaced once, late, and in a single direction, around 45 to 42,000 years ago. Instead, Mandrin points to an earlier pulse of Homo sapiens that pushed into Europe and then failed. The Neuronian vanished, and Neanderthal tools returned above layer E. Why that first modern presence collapsed remains unexplained. Critics have been vocal. One baby tooth, they argue, is a thin thread on which to hang a rewrite of European prehistory, and they have called for ancient DNA to confirm it. Slimak, whose book The Naked Neanderthal argues that the two species' histories were deeply entangled, points instead to the thousands of artifacts in Layer E, which allow statistical analysis rather than reliance on a single find. Three interpretations compete here: a real early incursion of sapiens, a case of contamination or misidentification, or a short-lived zone of contact and exchange. If our species could reach France this early and still fail, the obvious question is how early we first left Africa at all. Number 3. The Apidima Cave Skull. On the Mani Peninsula of southern Greece, two skulls sat in a museum drawer for decades before anyone realized what one of them might be. They had been pulled from Apidima Cave in 1978, embedded together in a single block of hardened cave sediment, high on a vertical cliff. Then a team led by Katerina Harvati of the University of Tübingen restudied them. In July 2019, they published a claim in Nature that stunned the field. One of the skulls, Apidima 1, was an early Homo sapiens, at least 210,000 years old. Its neighbor, Apidima 2, was a Neanderthal, about 170,000 years old. If Harvati is right, Apidima 1 is the oldest Homo sapiens fossil ever found in Europe, and among the oldest anywhere outside Africa. It would push modern humans into southeastern Europe roughly 150,000 years earlier than the conventional arrival date near 45,000 years ago. The team reached this conclusion using uranium series dating, along with computed tomography and three-dimensional geometric morphometrics to reconstruct the shattered fragments. Apidima 1 preserves only the rounded back of the skull. Crucially, it lacks the Neanderthal bun and shows the globular, rounded shape typical of our species. The implication turns the usual story inside out. Here an early population of Homo sapiens appears in Europe, only to be replaced later by Neanderthals. That is the reverse of the replacement we normally teach. It mirrors a pattern already seen in the Levant, where early sapiens fossils at sites like Mislia, Skul, and Kafze appear and then vanish before the successful later migration. Not everyone accepts the reading. Some researchers argue Apidima 1 is itself a Neanderthal, misclassified from fragmentary bone. A 2020 reanalysis disputed both the associations and the dates. Part of the difficulty is physical. The two skulls were locked together in the same block of hardened breccia. cemented high on a vertical cliff, which makes their stratigraphic context hard to read with confidence. Harvati's specialty is precisely this kind of problem, the geometric morphometric study of fragmentary hominin crania, teasing a species out of a curve of bone. And because the uranium series result is only a minimum age, the true age of Apidima, one could be older still, not younger. 3 possibilities frame the debate: an early sapiens vanguard that failed, a misread Neanderthal, or a transitional, possibly hybrid population that fits neither box cleanly. If sapiens are the surprise in Europe, it forces a second question. Who was the surprise back in the Levant? Number 4. Nesher, Ramla, Homo. The answer may lie in a sinkhole near the Israeli town of Ramla. In June 2021, 2 papers in Science described a new kind of archaic human recovered there, from a site called Nesher Ramla. The remains, a partial skull bone and a nearly complete lower jaw with a tooth, date to between 120,000 and 140,000 years ago. The work was led by Israel Hershkovitz and Hila May of Tel Aviv University, together with Yossi Zeidner of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who excavated the site as a rescue dig about 8 meters down, ahead of quarrying at a cement plant. The fossils are a mosaic. The teeth and jaw look Neanderthal, but the skull is distinct and non-Neanderthal. Rather than rush to name a new species, the team called the population the Nesher Ramla Homo type. Then they made a bold proposal. This group, they argued, could be a source population that fed into the European Neanderthals. In other words, some Neanderthal ancestry may trace back to the Levant, rather than flowing the other way. That flips the standard assumption that Neanderthals arose in Europe and only later moved south into the Near East. There is more. The stone tools at Nesher Ramla show a sophisticated Levallois flake technology, the same approach used by contemporaneous Homo sapiens in the region. Hearths and butchered animal bones reveal controlled fire and hunting. Taken together, the picture is of Nesher Ramla people and modern humans living side by side, sharing techniques, and likely exchanging genes. This fits genetic evidence of gene flow into Neanderthals from a sapiens-like population more than 100,000 years ago. Hershkovitz went further, suggesting the Nesher Ramla people might be the missing Middle Pleistocene humans of the Levant, a long-lived group that persisted in the region for hundreds of thousands of years. Microcomputed tomography let the team compare the internal structure of the teeth and bone against Neanderthals, sapiens, and earlier Homo, while luminescence methods dated the sediments that enclosed the fossils. Skeptics caution that fragmentary remains carry a heavy burden when the conclusions are this sweeping. 3 readings remain open: a genuine Levantine source population, a local variant of the Neanderthal lineage, or a distinct dead-end group that simply resembles both. Either way, the Levant looks less like a one-way corridor and more like a crossroads where human lineages met and mixed. While Europe and the Near East blur together, Southeast Asia was quietly producing something far stranger. Number 5. Homo Luzonensis. In April 2019, a team led by Florent Detroit and Armand Salvador Mijares announced a brand new human species in nature. It came from Chiquihuite Cave on the island of Luzon in the Philippines, and they named it Homo Luzonensis. The remains are modest: teeth, hand, and foot bones, and a partial thigh bone from at least 3 individuals. But they date to at least 50,000 to 67,000 years ago, with 1 foot bone found back in 2007, dated to around 67,000. The anatomy is deeply strange. The teeth are small, like those of much later members of our genus. Yet the finger and toe bones are curved, resembling those of Australopithecus, a group that lived millions of years earlier. Those curved bones suggest Luzonensis may still have been climbing trees. Here's the puzzle that unsettles the timeline. Luzon has never been connected to the Asian mainland by a land bridge. even when sea levels dropped to their lowest. To reach it, the ancestors of Luzonensis had to cross open water. How a small, apparently primitive hominin managed an ocean crossing, whether by accidental rafting on storm debris or by intent, is unknown. Luzonensis is not alone. It echoes Homo Floresiensis, the so-called hobbit of the island of Flores, another dwarfed and isolated island hominin in Southeast Asia. Because tropical conditions destroy ancient DNA, Detroit's team relied on detailed comparison of shape rather than genetics. Elsewhere on Luzon, at a site called Kalinga, butchered rhinoceros bones show hominins reached the island around 700,000 years ago, far earlier than the Luzonensis fossils themselves. That deep history hints at multiple arrivals, or a single lineage that changed over immense time. The molars are among the smallest of any member of our genus, yet the premolars carry unusually complex roots, another of the contradictions that make this creature so hard to place. The dates themselves came from uranium series measurements, taken directly on the teeth and bone. Caution is warranted, since a species built on a handful of bones may be revised as more emerge. But the message is already clear. This creature coexisted with Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Floresiensis, a remarkably crowded world. 3 explanations circulate: a relict offshoot of Homo erectus, a dwarfed island lineage shaped by isolation, or a separate early dispersal into island Southeast Asia. Whatever the truth, the neat march of a single advancing human line looks less believable with every island, and the pattern of impossible arrivals was about to repeat on the other side of the planet. Number 6. Chiquihuite Cave. High in the Astillero Mountains of Zacatecas in northern Mexico sits a cave nearly 2,750 meters above sea level. In July 2020, a team led by Cyprian Ardelin published a claim in Nature that could double the timeline of humans in the Americas. Stone tools at Chiquihuite Cave, they reported, date back as far as 26,500 years ago. For decades, the peopling of the Americas was anchored around 13 to 16,000 years, tied to the Clovis culture and a handful of pre-Clovis sites. The team recovered nearly 2,000 stone artifacts from deep, well-layered cave sediments. The pieces are made of a distinctive greenish and blackish limestone, and Ardelin argues that this rock does not naturally break into such shapes. Radiocarbon and optically stimulated luminescence dating placed the oldest layers between 25,000 and 26,500 years ago, squarely within the last glacial maximum, the coldest depths of the last ice age. If people were in central Mexico then, they arrived long before the ice-free corridor through Canada opened, which implies a coastal route or an even earlier arrival. The claim is fiercely contested, and for a specific reason. No human bones, no hearths, and no human DNA were found with the tools. The archaeologist David Meltzer argued that the so-called artifacts could be geofacts, rocks fractured by natural forces rather than shaped by hands. Environmental DNA pulled from the sediments returned plants and animals, but no humans. Skeptics also ask why anyone would occupy a cold, high cave during a glacial maximum. Supporters answer with the sealed deep stratigraphy and the consistency of the dates through the sequence. A companion study in Nature by Lorena Becerra Valdivia and Thomas Hyam modeled dates across many sites and supported a human presence before the last glacial maximum. Ardelin himself spent close to a decade working the site before publishing, well aware of the scrutiny such an early date would attract. The tools show no Clovis-style bifaces, suggesting a tradition unrelated to any later American culture, which leaves the makers unknown. This is the recurring headache of the earliest American sites, the difficulty of proving that a broken rock was shaped by a hand rather than by the slow violence of nature. 3 positions define the fight: a genuine occupation 26,000 years ago, a cave full of natural geofacts, or some intermittent process that only mimics human work. Chiquihuite sits alongside Monte Verde in Chile and the White Sands footprints in New Mexico, all pushing the same boundary. And if the date humans reached the Americas keeps sliding, so too does the date our species began. Number 7. Jebel Irhoud. About 100 kilometers west of Marrakesh, in Morocco, lies a site that reset the birthday of our species. Fossils had been found at Jebel Irhoud during mining work in the 1960s, but they were badly misunderstood, first labeled African Neanderthals, and later thought to be around 40,000 years old. Then, in June 2017, Jean-Jacques Hublin of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology published 2 papers in Nature that changed everything. The remains of at least 5 individuals, he argued, were about 300,000 years old. That date pushes the origin of Homo sapiens back roughly 100,000 years from the previous benchmark, the Omo Kibish fossils in Ethiopia, near 200,000 years. The anchor for the New Age was thermoluminescence, dating of burnt flint tools, stone that had been heated in ancient fires, and could therefore be dated directly. Daniel Richter led that effort, supported by electron spin resonance. What the fossils show is just as important as when they lived. Their faces are strikingly flat and modern, but their brain cases are longer and more archaic than ours. Hublin drew a powerful conclusion from this. The modern human face evolved before the modern globular brain shape. In other words, brain reorganization continued long after we looked like ourselves. The find also reshaped the geography of our origins. For years, the story centered on a single East African cradle. Jebel Irhoud supports a Pan-African model instead, in which Homo sapiens emerged gradually across the whole continent, connected through a then-green Sahara. The Middle Stone Age tools at the site, Levallois flakes and points, belong to a technology shared across Africa around 300,000 years ago, evidence that populations usually studied in isolation were in fact linked across the continent. Burnt gazelle bones mark it as a hunting camp, not a burial ground. There is a neat irony in the history of the site, too. The fossils first found here in the 1960s were originally misread as African Neanderthals, and only decades later, once the burnt flint was dated, did their true age and identity emerge. Debate continues over whether the Irhoud people were fully modern or an early, transitional form of sapiens. 3 views persist. The earliest true members of our species, a stem population on the way to becoming us, or a regional North African variant. Either way, Jebel Irhoud is the new textbook anchor, and it drags the deepest question closer. If our species is older than we thought, where did the human lineage itself begin? Number 8. Graecopithecus El Graeco. Here the timeline leaps from thousands of years to millions, and the claim becomes truly radical. Graecopithecus freybergi is known from almost nothing, a single lower jaw found near Athens in 1944, and one isolated upper premolar from Asmaka in Bulgaria. In May 2017, a team led by Madeleine Böhm of the University of Tübingen and Nikolai Spasov of Bulgaria published an analysis in the journal PLOS One. Graecopithecus, they argued, lived about 7.2 million years ago, and may be the oldest known member of the human lineage. Their central evidence is subtle. The roots of the premolars and molars appear partly fused, a trait more typical of hominins than of apes. If that reading holds, it would place the split between the human and chimpanzee lineages in the eastern Mediterranean, not in Africa. That directly challenges the near-universal consensus built on African fossils, like Sahelanthropus from Chad, dated near 7 million years. The Athens jaw was dated using associated mammal fossils and the magnetic record in the sediments. The team even linked the find to the spread of savanna into southeastern Europe, a possible pressure toward walking upright. They nicknamed the specimen El Graeco, a play on the painter El Graeco. Skepticism was swift and strong. Many paleoanthropologists noted that one jaw and a single tooth are thin evidence for so dramatic a claim. Root fusion, critics argued, can appear in apes too, and is not a reliable hominin marker on its own. The specimen was examined with computed tomography to visualize the internal roots, but the debate did not settle. Contemporary fossil apes, such as Ornithopithecus, lived in Greece at the time, showing the region hosted a rich primate community in the late Miocene. The Bulgarian premolar from Asmaka was dated to around 7.24 million years, slightly older than the Athens jaw at about 7.18 million, which at least places the two specimens in the same deep window. The team also pointed to disputed hominin-like footprints at Trikailos on Crete, dated around 6 million years, though those prints are separately contested. 3 interpretations survive: a genuine European hominin, a late Miocene ape whose teeth merely converged on a human trait, or a fragment too small to decide. Even those who reject the hominin label admit the Eastern Mediterranean was ecologically capable of hosting early human ancestors. And fragments this thin, this ambiguous, are scattered across Asia as well. Number 9. Hualongdong and Homo Juluensis. In Anhui Province, China, a Middle Pleistocene site called Hualongdong yielded a remarkably well-preserved skull, known as HLD6, dated to about 300,000 years ago. Xujie Wu of the Chinese Academy of Sciences began describing it from 2019, and the skull refused to fit any neat category. Its face is surprisingly modern for its age, resembling later Homo sapiens more than other Asian hominins of the time. Yet its brain case carries archaic features. It is, in a sense, the reverse of Jebel Irhoud, a modern face paired with an old-fashioned skull. In 2024, the researchers Christopher Bay and Xujie Wu proposed a new species name to gather these puzzling Chinese fossils together: Homo Juluensis, meaning big head. The name is literal. Some of the grouped specimens, including those from Sujiayao and Suchong, have enormous brain cases, in some cases exceeding 1,700 to 1,800 cubic centimeters, larger than the modern human average. Most controversially, the proposal suggests some of these fossils, possibly even the Denisovans, belong to this big head group. That would make Juluensis a distinct East Asian human lineage, separate from Neanderthals, from Denisovans as usually defined, and from our own species. Reaction has been mixed. Many researchers warn that lumping diverse fossils under one new name may add confusion rather than clarity, especially without ancient DNA to tie the specimens together. The Hualongdong assemblage includes cranial and jaw material from several individuals, along with stone tools and animal remains, and was dated using uranium series methods on associated flowstones and correlation of the animal fossils. Without ancient DNA, the boldest part of the proposal, tying the big head group to the Denisovans, remains speculative, resting on the shape of bones rather than the sequence of genes. What the find really exposes is the muddle in the middle, the long-standing difficulty of sorting Middle Pleistocene Asian hominins into clean species. It feeds a growing argument that East Asia hosted its own independent and diverse chapter of human evolution, one that a simple out-of-Africa story cannot easily contain. 3 positions define the debate: a valid new species, a regional population of Denisovans, or premature taxonomy that will not survive scrutiny. Whatever the outcome, the human family tree in Asia is far messier than the textbooks admit, and the messiest, coldest frontier was still to come. Number 10. Ranis and the Ilsenhöhle. Beneath a castle at Ranis, in the German region of Thuringia, lies a cave called the Ilsenhöhle. It was first dug in the 1930s, then re-excavated by a Max Planck team from 2016, who had to remove a rock overhang 1.7 meters thick to reach an old, undated layer. In 2024, 3 linked papers, in Nature and Nature Ecology and Evolution, reported that Homo sapiens lived here around 45,000 years ago. That places modern humans in cold, high-latitude northern Europe, far earlier than the picture of a later, warmer expansion. The remains are tied to a stone tool tradition called the Lincolnbian, Ranisian, Gersmanovician, a mouthful usually shortened to the LRJ, whose makers had long been uncertain. Tiny bone fragments were first identified as human using collagen peptide fingerprinting, a method called Juluensis, and then ancient DNA and protein analysis confirmed the LRJ toolmakers at Ranis were Homo sapiens, not Neanderthals. The work brought together Jean-Jacques Soublin, Elena Zavala, Marcel Weiss, and Sarah Peterzani, among others. Reconstructed climate data showed these people endured near-glacial, subarctic conditions, sharing the landscape with reindeer, cave bears, woolly rhinos, and horses across an open tundra. Then the genetics deepen the story. Some of the Ranis individuals are related to a person from Zlatý Kun in Czechia, part of an early sapiens population that appears to be a dead end, leaving little or no genetic contribution to later Europeans. These were pioneers who pushed into the frozen north, while Neanderthals were still present and then vanished from the family tree. The LRJ industry stretches from Britain to Poland, and Ranis finally gave that widespread culture a human face. Reaching it took real effort. The 1930s dig had stopped above a deep, undated layer, and the modern team had to cut away a rock overhang more than 1.5 meters thick to get at it. Zavala's mitochondrial DNA analysis linked related individuals across the site, while Peterzani's isotope work on animal teeth reconstructed the bitter climate they tolerated. The find overturns the assumption that surviving extreme cold required later technology or biology. 3 readings emerge: a pioneering, cold-adapted vanguard, a doomed migration that left no descendants, or one node in a wider LRJ network spanning the continent. Ranis shows the peopling of Europe as a series of repeated, sometimes failed incursions, and that idea deserves a closer look on its own. Step back from the individual finds, and a pattern comes into focus, one that connects sites thousands of kilometers apart. Again and again, a human population expands into new territory, fails, and retreats, leaving only faint traces. In the Levant, early Homo sapiens at Mislia reached at least 185,000 years ago, then disappeared before the main wave. At Apidima, an early sapiens vanguard in Europe was apparently replaced by Neanderthals. At Grotte Mandrin, the Neronian pulse of modern humans collapsed, and Neanderthal tools returned. At Ranis, the Zlatý Kun-linked pioneers left almost nothing in the modern gene pool. In the Americas, the contested pre-Clovis sites hint at arrivals that may not have persisted. Why would early expansions fail so often? Small founding groups are fragile. A run of harsh climate, competition with established populations, or simple bad luck can erase a lineage while leaving its bones behind. This is the crucial distinction the new science reveals. A fossil proves a population was present. It does not prove that population survived. Ancient DNA has exposed these dead ends, these ghost lineages, in a way that bones alone never could. Interglacial windows opened routes that later closed. Sea levels and ice corridors acted as gates, letting people through and then trapping or stranding them. The presence of Neanderthals could serve as a barrier in one place and a mixing partner in another. The old textbooks compressed all of this into a single confident arrow out of Africa. The reality was a series of pulses, most of which died out. Consider how the statistics themselves can mislead. The family tree we draw is built almost entirely from survivors, from the lineages that made it through, which quietly hides the many that did not. A population can be genetically a dead end, while still being physically, undeniably present in the dirt. That is why the old story felt so clean. It was the story the winners left behind. There is a quiet weight to that. Whole peoples reached new worlds, and then vanished, remembered only as a smear of statistics and a fragment of a tooth. To understand how we can even see these ghosts, we have to look at how these discoveries are dated. Every claim in this video rests on chronology, and chronology is the hidden engine driving all these upheavals. The reason the timeline keeps changing is that our ability to measure time has been transformed. Radiocarbon dating, the familiar workhorse, runs out of usefulness around 50,000 years because the carbon-14 it measures decays away. To reach deeper, scientists turned to other clocks. Thermoluminescence dates burnt flint, which is how Jebel Irhoud was anchored at 300,000 years. Optically stimulated luminescence measures when sediment grains were last exposed to sunlight, dating the burial itself. Uranium series and uranium-thorium methods date teeth and the flowstones in caves, as at Hualongdong and Homo Naledi. Electron spin resonance reads the signal trapped in tooth enamel. Then there is the molecular revolution. Ancient DNA can now be pulled from bones and even cave dirt, though tropical heat destroys it, which is why Homo Luzonensis has yielded none. Proteomics and the Zoo-MS collagen fingerprinting method let researchers pick human bone fragments out of a heap of shattered pieces, as they did at Ranis. At Grotte Mandrin, the entirely new technique of phylogenochronology read layers of soot to time occupations to within a year. Magnetostratigraphy helped date the Graecopithecus jaw across millions of years. And Bayesian statistical modeling, used by Becerra Valdivia and Hayam, combines dates from many sites to test whether a pattern is real. These methods cross-check one another. A single date can be wrong, corrupted by contamination, or by older material washing into a younger layer. That is why finds like Apidima carry minimum ages, and why fossils once misdated, like Irhoud as a 40,000-year-old Neanderthal, could be so dramatically corrected. Improved methods keep pushing dates earlier, and dating has become the referee between rival theories. It is worth noticing the direction of that drift. As the techniques sharpen, the dates rarely get younger. They get older. The arrival of humans in the Americas, the origin of our species in Africa, the presence of sapiens in Europe, all of them keep sliding backward as the clocks improve. That is not an accident of any one site. It is a signal that the old timeline was systematically too shallow. Yet even with better clocks, there is a human tendency to resist what they reveal. It is worth asking why the old timeline was so clean in the first place. The famous image of the ascent of man, a single file of figures straightening from ape to human, burned itself into the public mind. It was simple, memorable, and wrong. The same impulse produced the single origin, single wave story of leaving Africa, the Clovis first orthodoxy in the Americas, and the assumption that Neanderthals began in Europe. Each of these was a working model built on limited fossils, and each hardened into something treated as fact. Part of the reason is practical. When you have only a few specimens, a simple story is attractive and hard to disprove. Textbooks and famous sites gave that story inertia, and confirmation bias did the rest, since a date that matched expectations was rarely questioned, as hard as one that did not. Some of the gatekeeping was healthy, demanding more than one tooth, or ruling out geofacts protect science from wishful thinking. But the same caution can slow the acceptance of genuine surprises. What changed is that each new method exposed hidden complexity the old picture could not hold. Interbreeding blurred the neat species boundaries. Dead-end migrations broke the single arrow. Slowly the latter gave way to a braided stream, a bush with many branches, most of them ending. The tidy version survives in classrooms because it is easy to draw, not because it is true. There is a lesson in that about how science actually moves. It does not usually advance by a single dramatic overthrow, but by an accumulation of awkward finds that no longer fit, until the old picture quietly buckles under their weight. The march of progress did not fall to one killer fossil. It fell to Naledi and Mandrin and Apidima and Ranis and Chiquihuite, each adding a little more pressure, none of them decisive alone. That gap between a convenient model and reality is exactly where the honest uncertainty lives, and it is worth facing directly. For all the excitement, intellectual honesty demands we admit how much remains unresolved. Did Homo naledi truly bury its dead, or did sediment and water arrange those bodies? Was the baby tooth at Grotte Mandrin really Homo sapiens, and did that group survive at all beyond a brief flicker? Is Apidima one an early sapiens, or a misread Neanderthal? Is the Nesher Ramla population a genuine source for European Neanderthals, or merely a local variant that resembles them? How on earth did Homo Luzonensis cross open ocean? Are the stones at Chiquihuite Cave tools, or geofacts? Is Graecopithecus a hominin, or an ape whose teeth happen to look the part? Does Homo Juluensis deserve a species name, or is it premature? And who, precisely, were the doomed pioneers at Ranis? These are not signs of failure. Disagreement is how the science works. Behind every question sits a deeper problem. We can never recover DNA from the warmest, oldest fossils. Countless sites remain buried, undug, or already destroyed by mining and development. Many specimens are locked in disputed classification, waiting for a method not yet invented. There is a constant danger of overreading a single fragment, of building a population's whole history from one jaw. Some of today's boldest claims will be overturned, and some will be triumphantly confirmed. Which is which, we do not yet know. If history is any guide, the finds most likely to survive are those anchored by multiple independent dating methods and, where possible, by molecular evidence, while the ones resting on a single fragment or a lone contested trait are the ones to watch most warily. That is not a criticism of the researchers. It is simply the nature of working at the edge of what the evidence can bear. That uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It is the story, an ongoing investigation, rather than a closed book. And when you hold all of these finds together, a new shape for the human past emerges. Every discovery in this video did the same thing. It pushed a date back, or broke a boundary we thought was fixed. Homo naledi untethered complex behavior from brain size. Jebel Irhoud aged our species by 100,000 years. Apidima, Mandrin, and Ranis planted modern humans in Europe far too early, only to watch those pioneers fail. Nesher Ramla reversed the flow of Neanderthal ancestry. Luzonensis crossed an impossible sea. Chiquihuite doubled the age of the Americas. Graecopithecus and Homo Juluensis reminded us that even the base and the branches of the tree are contested. Put together, they replace the single-file line with something richer, a branching, tangled bush. Multiple human species coexisted over and over, and interbreeding was the rule rather than the exception. Early expansions failed and left ghosts in our genes, and the modern face appeared long before the modern mind. When people say, "These finds show our timeline is wrong," what they really mean is that it is deeper and stranger than we were taught. The traces of it live in us still, in the Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA carried by billions of people today. There is a kind of wonder in that, and a kind of humility. We are one surviving branch among many that reached for new worlds. Some of those branches vanished, and their disappearance speaks to both the fragility and the resilience of our kind. More surprises are certainly buried, waiting for the next slender excavator, the next new dating method, the next careful argument. Somewhere right now, a fossil that will move a date again is sitting in a drawer, or a cliff, or a cave that no one has entered, exactly as the Apidima skulls waited quietly in a museum for 40 years before anyone understood what they were. The story is not finished. It never was. And you are not just a spectator to it. You are a partner in an investigation that is still, right now, being dug out of the ground. And the next chapter of it may well be written by a discovery that has not yet been made, in a place no one has thought to look.